Try to drug and rape an innocent girl at a party? No, not while I'm here. So, to put it simply, I was a little shit as a kid. I used to steal from stores and family, swear and throw things at random people walking down the street, was smoking from the age of 12, and didn't give a shit about anyone but my friends. They were my real family, or so I thought, and the group of all 5 of us would cause trouble every single fucking day. My parents, though in my later years have told me they should have been more effective in their discipline, really weren't to blame. I was just a mixed-up kid. I used to think that doing all this stuff made me cool. I can't really describe how superior I felt when I made grown adults afraid of me, but it made me feel powerful, and power was something I craved when I was younger. I could go on and on about my sins, but the fact is, I was just fucked in the head. I've made amends where I can do who I could, but you're not here for self-flagellation, you're here for the revenge. So long story short, when I was 16, my parents finally had enough, and despite all my tantrums and screaming, and even some physical violence against my dad, they decided to put me in a school for troubled youth. I call it a school, but what it really was a military institution that taught discipline in the most brutally effective ways while throwing in some literacy and numeracy classes along the way. Without going into too much detail, I'll say that this school changed me. While aggressive, violent, cocky, and near homicidal when I was first dumped on their doorstep, the men who ran this camp broke me down. I was there for just over a year. No phone calls, no visits home, no access to the outside world. For 1 whole year, I had this camp and these counselors, these real-life hard-ass men teach me just how much of a shit stain I really was. By the end of my 2nd summer, I was a changed kid. I had fought and screamed and gotten my ass kicked more times than I can count, but eventually, I was beaten down. These men taught me that real men simply don't act the way I did, and that the type of path I was headed down would lead me either in jail or dead. They were brutally honest about it, especially this one counselor, Jay. By the end of my stay, I considered Jay a second father. Though I hated him at first for making me feel inferior, he really did me a favor teaching me how toxic my behavior was, and to this day I still think of him as something of a hero. He was the main person who deemed me ready to return home. But the backstory is getting really long, so let's get to the real story. When I returned home, I had changed from an abusive little prick to a somewhat civilized young man, ready to take on my last year of high school. I was nervous to go back, since I had adapted to the disciplinary school lifestyle, but I was also excited. I missed my friends, and hoped they would just accept me back despite the fact that I hadn't spoken to any of them in over a year. And to my relief, I was accepted back with open arms. One of my closest friends had moved states since I'd been away, but the other 3 were ecstatic to see me. Over the next few weeks I settled down. I didn't spend a lot of time with them outside of school. My parents were kind of testing how much I'd matured since returning, and were setting boundaries on when I could go out, how long I could stay out, and where I could go, etc. I was determined to prove to them I wasn't the same fuck-up that had ruined their lives all those years, so I followed their rules, and so only really talked to my friends during school. All of this is relevant because of what happened next. I had joined the school football team all 3 friends were a part of, and one evening after practice, all my teammates were in the gym, sweaty and dirty, but pleased with ourselves. I was laughing and chatting with my 3 best friends so much I didn't really notice that we were the last left in the gym. But that's when the conversation started turning bad. One of my friends, I'll call him F1, friend 1, for simplicity, started telling me about a college party they were all planning on going to, and how they'd been crashing college parties for a few months now, since it was easy access to girls and booze. I was hesitant about it because I didn't think my mom and dad would agree to let me go. But then F1 started talking about this girl he was planning on inviting. A girl who went to the same school as us, but not one I thought F1 had any real relationship with. I knew her, but I didn't know her. He started to tell both my other friends and me that he'd been trying to get her into bed for a while and she kept making excuses, so he planned on taking her to the party and finally smashing. When I asked him, in a joking way, what makes you so sure she won't reject you again? He looked me dead in the eye and said as casually as you please the most chilling sentence I have ever heard in my entire life. I'm just gonna slip something in her drink. It'll loosen her up, no problem. At first, I just kind of awkwardly laughed, thinking it was some fucked up joke, but they weren't laughing with me. When I asked him if he was serious, he told me he was sick of her bullshit games and knew she was just stringing him along, and that the pills would just make things easier. I could not believe my fucking ears. I excused myself from the conversation pretty quickly and practically bolted home, most likely driving through several stop signs, but I really don't remember. I spent the whole night convincing myself my friends were just messing around. A few more days pass and the conversation in the locker room is all but forgotten, though they hadn't shut up about the party and kept insisting that I just sneak out and join them. I got called a pussy repeatedly for telling them I wasn't going because of my parents, but again, I just brushed it off. Then the shit finally hits the fan. During yet another after-school training session, we all end up the last in the lockers. And F1 does something I never would have expected in 1,000 fucking years. All three of them have been talking about the party this whole time. Then F1 starts rummaging through his gym bag. He tells us all to look at this and tosses F2 a small bag of little pink pills. Immediately, I feel the blood drain from my face, and like a bomb's going off in my head, a voice in my mind is screaming, "Holy shit, this is really happening. This is serious. Holy fucking shit." It's really hard to describe what I was feeling when F1 started going into detail about how he planned on inviting the girl to the party, slipping something into her drink, and making use of one of the frat boys' bedrooms for a few hours. I was sick. Like literally could have hurled everything from my stomach all over the floor as I listened to all three of them talk about how awesome the party was going to be after just describing how they were planning to rape a girl. I couldn't take it, and again I ran off. I actually did end up puking later that night, going over and over in my head what the fuck I had just witnessed. I almost couldn't believe it. These three boys had been my friends for 15 years. I thought of them as my own family, thought I knew them better than anyone, but 1 year away, and this? I'll tell you that I actually broke down crying that night. I'm not ashamed to admit it. What I am ashamed of is how long I took to actually get a grip and handle it. I knew I should have told someone, but in some fucked up way, my loyalties were still screwed. Don't crucify me for it. I know now what I should have done, but I was 17, and these were my best friends. I didn't want them to get into trouble, but at the same time, I knew I couldn't let this shit go down, so instead of reporting all I'd heard to an adult like a normal fucking person, I decided I'd sort it out all on my own. And now, to the revenge. After a weekend of being grounded, I went back to school, and the first thing I did was seek out F1. He was about as bashed up as I was, but he was sporting a nice black eye from where I'd hit him in the face. F2 and F3 were standing with him, and they all glared at me as I approached them. Then I did something that made me feel sick. I apologized to him. I told him I was sorry I hit him, and that he was right. I had changed, and I hated what that school had done to me, and I wanted to go back to being the old me again, and surprisingly, they all bought it. F1 and I even hugged it out, and I put the cherry on top when I told them I'd be coming to the party. Now, for my dumbass teenage plan. First, I started recording them whenever we were alone together. I wanted to get everything they said about the party and the girl they were planning on victimizing on tape. I knew I needed some kind of proof, or it would just be my word against theirs. And after a few days, I had gotten more than enough. But I wasn't done. No, my stupid self had a plan, and I was going to fulfill it to the fullest. So the next thing I did was track down the girl, take her aside, and tell her everything. She was pissed and scared, but I begged her not to go to the police or tell anyone. I know now that was stupid as well, but for some reason, she listened to me. I had a plan. A crazy, stupid plan to teach them all a lesson. So I told her to tell F1 that she was going to meet him at the party, but to just stay home, so she could stay safe. Later that day, F1 started bragging about how the girl had accepted his invitation and everything was going to plan. And I sat there, phone half out my pocket, recording the whole damn thing. So night of the party finally rolls around, and I sneak out, because, I was grounded. I think it's worth mentioning that I wasn't filled with vindication and self-righteousness throughout the whole night. I was second-guessing myself, I had doubts, but in some strange way, I felt betrayed. These three boys had been my brothers since before I could throw a punch, and I felt betrayed that they had gone down this road. What fucked me in the head even more was the possibility that I might have been just like them if my parents hadn't sent me away. It was a strange moment of realization to come to in the middle of a crowded frat house surrounded by drunk idiots. But you take what life throws at you. So the night goes on, and F1 is getting steadily more frustrated that the girl he invited hadn't shown up. I'd made sure to keep him in my sights for the whole night, not wanting him to decide that any old girl would do if he couldn't take the one he wanted. I kept an eye on all of them, watching as they drank and drank while I stayed as level-headed as possible with some water and a beer can. When midnight came, all three of them were plastered, and I knew that all the girls at the party would be safe by then. By this time, the crowd was dying down, and a few people who couldn't hold their liquor were already passed out around the house. And now was my time to shine. While all three of them were occupied with a drinking game, I hunted in F1's bag and found the bag of little pink pills. Here's where I did something I'm not particularly proud of, but I'll tell you anyway. I slipped one pill into 3 beers each and handed them to my friends, and then waited. It didn't take long before all three were passed out on the floor, along with quite a few other party guests. I then took out a black permanent marker pen from my bag and wrote, "Rapist," on all three of their foreheads, took pictures, and immediately uploaded them to our school's Facebook page, so everyone who attended our school would see. Admittedly, I didn't really think this part through, since I not only did this in full view of every other conscious person at the party, but also knew the photos wouldn't last long on the school site before they would be taken down. But since it was a small school in a small town, I didn't doubt that a whole bunch of people would see it before a teacher removed the photos, and that's exactly what I wanted. Next came the recordings. When I got home, I got a verbal bludgeoning from my parents for sneaking out, but they stopped when I finally told them what had been happening. They were both shocked and a little disbelieving, but when I played them both the recordings I'd saved on my phone, they were just as sickened as I was. I was silent in the car as my dad drove me to the police station, receiving a lecture about how I should have just come to him in the first place, and what I'd done at the party wasn't necessary. But I felt like it was at the time. My phone had already blown up with other students commenting on the pictures of my 3 ex-friends with "rapist" written on their foreheads. And while a lot just laughed at them, many were questioning if there was any truth to it. It was what I wanted. I wanted everyone to know who they really were, so they had nowhere to hide. The hours at the police station were admittedly very scary. I was still debating with myself whether or not I did the right thing, but my friends had chosen their own fate. I still felt hurt and betrayed they'd allowed themselves to become this way, and even though I felt a little guilt for potentially ruining their future, I did what I thought had to be done. And long story short, the recordings were enough to get them all on charges of planning to commit a crime. Since the girl F1 had been planning on drugging had been named, her parents were understandably furious and demanded all 3 of my ex-friends be arrested. I would have been too, were it not for the girl telling her parents and the courts that I had warned her to stay away from F1 and the party. I was charged for my use of an illegal substance, since I admitted to using the pills on my 3 ex-friends, and also for battery, since the permanent marker was seen as a form of assault, but luckily I never got jail time. I did get a boatload of community service though. All 3 of them were tried as adults in a case of attempted rape, but only F1 got actual jail time, since he was the one who'd gotten the pills and was the only one who admitted to wanting to use them. The other 2 only got probation and community service for being accessories, but were completely shunned in our town. No one ever let them forget. I was prepared for the backlash, ready to be jumped by them or something, but strangely enough, I think seeing F1 go to jail for what he did knocked some sense into the 2 of them, and they wised up enough to actually get into college without football scholarships, since they were both kicked off the team. They never came anywhere near me again, which surprised me, but I no longer cared. In my mind, my friends were dead to me long before all of this went down, and by the time I moved away to college, it was all behind me. I'm in my final year of college now, and I still think about those 3 sometimes. I think about how, if my parents hadn't sent me to that special school, I may have ended up just like them. Oddly enough, I do miss them at times, but I know it's the memory of the kids I miss, not the men they turned into. I've thanked my parents continuously for sending me to that place, and even got some approval from Jay when I felt man enough to tell him what happened. I don't know what will happen to F1 when he gets out of jail, but a part of me hopes he learns his lesson and moves on with his life, like I have. Jay called me a few days ago, just to check up, and I told him this whole story, which is kind of why I'm now telling the internet. I guess the moral is to stand up to your friends when you know they're doing wrong, but maybe not in the stupid way I did it. Always involve others more qualified to deal with situations you're not sure about. Even if you're a headstrong, stubborn as fuck teenager who thinks you know everything. TLDR. 3 old friends of mine planned to rape a girl at a party, so I exposed them to the whole town and get one friend thrown in jail. Update. Wow. I did not expect to get this much support over all this. Thanks for the kind words, and sorry I haven't answered so many questions, but school has been harsh, so I'll try to answer as many as I can. 1. To all of you asking if the girl in the story and I became friends, well, sadly, no. We talked a lot during the court case and after, but we never really developed a friendship. I think we were both too embarrassed over everything, so we just went our separate ways and remained civil in school. 2. For everyone questioning why I sound British, all I can say is wow. I'm used to people picking up on it in person, but not through writing. Some of you guys must be secret geniuses. My father is British. His whole family lives over there, and we visit a lot. And his family is about as British as they come. And a little piece of side information, I was actually born in Britain, 6 weeks premature, but I was raised in America. 3. For everyone asking about Jay, well, he's great. A great man who's gone through a lot in his life, too. He lost his son to drugs, which is why I kind of think he made it his job to look out for boys like me, just to make sure no other parent goes through what he did. His reaction to what happened was to basically call me an idiot for all the crap I pulled, but he was proud I didn't forget everything I learned the moment I got home. He's also told me that he'd like for me to come and speak at the school next summer, just to tell some of the new boys coming in how bad things can get if you refuse to change the way you live. If I ever strike it rich, I'll be giving that school a massive donation. 4. For everyone asking where this happened, for the sake of everyone's privacy, including mine, I'm going to have to keep that a secret. All I can say is it was a small town with a small population, which is probably why the whole thing wasn't plastered all over the news. But I'm paranoid, so that will just have to remain a mystery. 5. For everyone suggesting I track down my friend that moved before I got back home, well, I'm kind of on the fence about that. Call me a coward, but I think I'd prefer to remember him as my childhood friend, without all the memories being tainted the way they are with all the others. If I went looking, I might not like what I find, and even though it's possible he changed too after being removed from such a toxic environment, I just don't know. I guess I'd rather live with the ambiguity. 6. For those of you wondering what I would have done in the situation if I'd never gone to that school, well, for obvious reasons, I can't really answer you. I'd like to think I would have stood up to them all the same, but my mind was seriously twisted back then, so I'd prefer not to think about that. 7. For everyone questioning what I'm doing now, I'm studying aerospace engineering. I love planes, and through my course, I've gotten to tour the underbelly of both planes and even some aircrafts that have been in space. I don't want to sound like a dork, but seeing all those components fit together, and actually knowing how it all works and what everything's called and how to identify everything, is seriously epic. I just hope I pass the course with a good enough grade to make a career out of it. Story 2. Guy tries to sell house from under my family, gets his just deserts. On mobile, and this is a story from when I was a kid, so apologies for formatting / not having complete details. My family was looking for a large house and found the perfect one back in the early 2000s. When my dad talked with the owners, they had agreed to getting some plumbing fixed on the house before we moved, and if we moved all of their stuff into the 2-car garage, so it'd be easier for them to move. There was also several things to be repaired, a pool to clean, and a ton of landscaping to be done. My dad did the repairs and used his army of offspring to do all the landscaping, pool work, etc. The house was looking amazing compared to before, and we were a week from moving in. Now, I to this day do not know why my dad did this, but he had paid a cash deposit. There was no paper trail, and the owners decided to take advantage of this. When it got to be a few days before we moved and the owners told my dad they weren't moving their stuff out of the garage or doing the plumbing fixes that were needed to use any of the bathtubs or showers in the house. He could deal with no garage and pay for the plumbing fixes, or he could fuck off. No refund of deposit if he didn't like it. They even said they were thinking of moving someone else in BC. The house value was more with all the fixes we had already done. My father asked to turn in the keys we had been given the next morning. BC. This was all told to him at 8 p.m. on a weekday. With no paperwork yet signed, there was nothing attaching my dad to the house and no cameras or security system. He had just been fucked over a few $1,000s by the owner, and it was maybe 2 weeks to Christmas. His gift that year was going to be giving each of us kids our own rooms for the first time. Cue revenge. He brought all of us kids over to the house for a little party. Each kid was given their own special bit of destruction. Someone was shoveling sand into the pool. My brother with anger issues was told to punch out every hole we had patched up in the walls. The smaller kids were told to rock the banister on the stairs until it broke. I was told to rip out the landscaping we had done out and make a path of it all over the stairs. Every single thing we had fixed or improved taken back by very creative and energetic children. While all this happened, my dad and stepmom went through everything in the garage from the owners and took anything they could gift to family, pawn, or sale. There were high-value collectibles, jewelry, and a computer that my dad gave to us for Christmas. The next day, my dad told the owners he had put the keys in the garage with its door open that night for them. He then unplugged the phone, and we never heard from those people again. Was it legal? No, not on either end. Did we have a good Christmas? Yes. Was it fun destroying the place? Yes, I actually did a very tastefully done carpet of hedge branches, torn our flowers, and some or of sand and pool gravel on the actual carpet of the house. I did post this elsewhere before, but it got taken down for violating a rule. I am the op for that post as well as this post. Story 3. Fire me for speaking up? Enjoy going out of business. This is a long one. Skip to the bottom for the TLDR if you must. Many years ago, I worked at an automotive repair shop that was owned by a very nasty person. This person actually had 2 shops that he ran, and the best way I can describe him was as a tyrant. Both shops had cameras, and he would watch us work from the comfort of his home. If he saw something he didn't like, such as taking a 5-minute smoke break or not sweeping for half a minute during downtime, or if he just wanted to bust balls, he would call the shop and harass us. Or better yet, at times, show up and harass us in person. In addition, he would regularly berate us for no reason, threaten to not pay us because the shops weren't busy, and would have an absolute meltdown if you dared question his authority. It was spectacular, in the worst of ways. After working for him for a few months, and dealing with his shenanigans, and getting sick of pointless arguments with him, I started reconsidering my employment there. Around the same time, the owner decided to move me from one shop to the other, really for no reason other than likely to try push me out, as that was what he did with the few people that I had already worked with. Odd coincidence being that I had not discussed my thoughts of leaving with anyone, but I digress. I genuinely disliked the idea of working at this other shop. It was older and a bit run down, plus it was in a pretty terrible area with high crime. But I wanted to line something up elsewhere before I jumped ship. So I made the move. This is where the beginning of the end started for Mr. Owner. Once I got settled into the new shop, I got to talking with my fellow technicians. As it turns out, the owner was unsurprisingly a racist scumbag, and every single one of the employees at this location, aside from me, was African American. I'll spare you the details, but let's just say it's a miracle that the owner came into the shop, said what he said, and walked out breathing. In addition, he would regularly send people home with no pay for the day just to be an ass. This went on for a few weeks, him coming by, being nasty to all of us, and I was over it, and was just about to leave as I had lined up other employment. The other techs were also over it. I went to give the owner my 2-week notice via phone, discreetly, which I should have known wasn't a great idea, and instead of discussing it like a human, he decided to come down and talk face to face. Well, our friend was so incensed that I put my notice in that he forced me to clock out and go home, and also forced 2 other techs who decided to stand up for me to do the same. I decided that I had enough of this guy's shit, and that not only did he deserve to have some kind of reciprocation against him, but the other techs deserved better than to continually being walked on. So I filed a complaint with the Department of Labor and outlined everything. Within a few days, they had launched an investigation, and of course the owner found out who filed the complaint and called the shop, and gave me hell about it, stupidly, because the phones he had were on recorded lines. Guess who I had request to listen to that conversation? In the end, I was terminated by him prior to my 2 weeks being up, as were the 2 techs who stood behind me. I filed for unemployment, which he fought me on by filing appeals with a judge, then not showing up 3 times in a row. This prompted the judge to bar him from requesting appeals against me and granting me full unemployment pay. Months later, I got a written letter from him extending an apology and offered to work for him again. 2 months later, I got a letter from the DL saying that the investigation was closed and that he had been found guilty of multiple charges and was barred from operating a shop or any other business in the state for several years. TLDR fucked around with my sanity, lost the ability to own shit.